Speedruns don't have to be based on the use of glitches. While we certainly love breaking games and going beyond the boundaries, sometimes there are already amazing strategies within the given boundaries of the game. This is where glitchless speedruns come into play. But before we start, what does glitchless even mean? The definition changes from time to time and also depending on the game. For example, at around 2012, Majora's Mask glitchless speedrunning didn't even allow to do the temples out of order. If you entered a temple, it had to be completed without leaving, and no temple may be entered before the previous one was beaten. While this makes sense to some degree, this would also mean that casual players that just obtained the bow, for example, suddenly did a glitched playthrough just because they wanted to explore the area around Termina. So eventually that rule got scrapped. Apart from details like this one, a fairly obvious rule applies here. If a technique seems questionable, it's banned. The only exception to this rule are techniques that are called oversights. These are little techniques that players found themselves during the first playthrough, such as damage boosting over the fence to Great Bay using the Goron Mask and a bomb. So with those things explained, it's time to explain how the Great Bay Temple can be beaten without the use of glitches.
We are starting by entering the second room of the dungeon and using the turn key to start the first geyser, that we can jump on once we use the elevator to get onto the platforms. We follow the path to the next room, which leads to a big water wheel. This room turns out to be the main room of the dungeon. Here we jump into the water and take the first corridor with the red pipes, but just skip the first room and swim to the room beyond that. In here we are greeted by Dekubabas in the water, but again, we can just ignore this part and move on to the next room. As we arrive, we finally get something to do. We get rid of the Dexy Hand and the Babas, which then allows us to reach the chest at the bottom of the room containing our first small key. From here we use the corridor leading to the main room again, and use the one on the bottom to reach another important room. In here we are met by a shell blade and a real bomb chew on a walkable pipe. We run up the pipe, get rid of the bomb chew, and face off Wart. The fight is fairly straightforward, yet somewhat obnoxious. It's annoying to deal with, as we always have to get rid of the bubbles in order to even damage him. After a couple of hits, he drops to the ground and starts rampaging without stopping. Here we have to hit him in the eye with preferably an arrow. It doesn't take long for Wart to be defeated and grants us the ice arrows, an item that actually has a use in this game. After obtaining it, it's time to head back into the room with the real bomb chew, get onto the platform in the corner, and freeze an Octorok so that we can climb onto it in order to reach another turn key. We swim back into the main room and then back into the corridor we first used after entering the dungeon. In here we swim to the surface, climb onto a platform, and use the hook shot on the map chest to reach a higher platform. From here we can just use ice arrows to build platforms and reach the door that couldn't be reached before. In here we use ice arrows again to freeze the choo-choo and use it as a block to reach yet another turn key. After doing so, it's time to head back into the room with the Dexy Hand, where we can now use ice arrows to face off the Gecko and the Mad Jelly in order to obtain the boss key. We deal with a fairly obvious fight using ice arrows and sword slashes, and we are rewarded with the boss key. From here we once again head into the main room, freeze the water that was blocking the ladders, and enter those rooms. In here we get rid of the Tektite, create a couple of platforms, and activate our first green switch. We then go into the second room of the dungeon again and use the hook shot to get to another turn key and use it, which is then followed by us using the yellow turn key to reverse the flow of the water in the main room. Back into the main room itself, we can now use the middle corridor to swim through, which we do up to the end. Get onto the elevator and freeze the water in order to stop the water wheel in this room. We hop onto the water wheel itself and get into the room on the other side. In here we encounter a couple of seesaws, which we have to manipulate by either freezing or unfreezing the water pillars in this room, which then allows us to get another green turn key and then back into the main room once again. As we now have everything set up, it's time to go into the last room. In here we just climb up the pipe and activate the last green turn key in order to get to the boss door, where we can finally face off Georg. This fight is considered one of the harder fights in the game, because the boss deals an insane amount of damage once he gets the chew on Link. We have to stun him using either the hookshot, arrows, or the Zora fins, and then jump into the water where we can now damage him. After a couple of hits, he goes into his second phase, in which he releases a few fish, which we can kill in order to get some health back. The fight itself, however, stays the same. Stun Georg, jump into the water, and deal damage. Especially for younger players, this fight is a problem, as it's hard to tell when to escape, as will be a delicious meal for him if we don't get out of the water fast enough. After a few more hits, Georg goes down, leaving his remains in a heart container behind.
In this video, we'll be using footage by Trev Person, as he currently has the world record for the Glitchless category. Trev starts off entering the second room and then positions himself very precisely on the elevator, from where he then jumps onto the water wheel itself and puts on Zora Mask first, which is then followed by Goron Mask. He waits up to a certain point on the water wheel and then rolls into the corridor on the other side of the room, skipping the turnkey altogether. From the main room on, he then heads into the top corridor. Unlike the regular playthrough, he stops in the first room and performs a dolphin dive against the wall in order to recoil from it and reach the top platform without ice arrows, allowing him to reach the red turnkey without ice arrows at all. In here, he performs a trick called Gainer, which is done by backflipping, releasing target on the startup frame, and retargeting on the next one in order to kill all momentum of the backflip, allowing him to backflip in place and reach the ledge of the turnkey platform. He heads back and goes into the Biobaba room now, where he then advances to the boss key room. In here, he can use a precise angle and just jump into the window with a boss key, allowing him to skip the gecko fight altogether, grab the boss key, and head back out again. Still in this room, he now jumps into the water, gets rid of the Dexy hand, and gets his first small key. After obtaining the small key, it's time to go to the main room, then swim to the bottom, and head towards the room in order to obtain the ice arrows. The ward fight isn't much different from the usual playthrough, except for the fact that bombs turn out to be more effective during the first phase, as their hitbox just ignores the bubble surrounding ward. The same principle applies during the second phase, except that he now puts bombs into the locations he thinks Wart will go to next, while also shooting the eye with arrows. After obtaining the ice arrows, he heads back out and uses them to turn the Octorok into an ice block and reach the red turnkey, just like the normal playthrough does before heading back out. Back in the main room, he uses the ice arrows to free the ladder from the water and enters the room with the first green turnkey. In here, however, he uses yet another precise angle and just uses a dolphin dive, which he then cancels at the right time by hitting B in order to just grab the ledge on the platform, skipping the use of ice arrows altogether. Once again back out, and into the room before the main room of the dungeon, where he uses the hookshot to turn the red and yellow turnkeys in order to reverse the flow of the main room. However, instead of getting back up the normal way, he just uses the Goron Mask to void out and spawn in the main room again. Here he heads into the middle corridor to get into the room with yet another water wheel, which he just dives on a Zora Link and precisely positions himself for him not to fall off and easily reach the room with the seesaws. He climbs on the first one, jumps into the second one with a well-timed Zora jump attack, and then lifts himself up using fire arrows by unfreezing the water, where he can then reach the second green turnkey with ease. Here he then climbs onto the fence next to the chest with a stray fairy, from where he can just jump onto the platform and get into the map room. Now the only objective is to get back into the main room, swim through the bottom corridor, and trigger the last green turnkey to reach Georg. The fight isn't much different from the normal playthrough, except for the fact that we are now aware that we can use the Zora barrier to damage Georg. We stun him with an arrow as he charges towards us, which will force him to just swim forward for a while after attacking him. This can be used to keep him in place, as he gets blocked by the platform in the middle, where we can repeatedly damage him with our Zora barrier and get into the second phase of the fight. However, as the fight itself didn't change a lot, we just wait for him to attack again and use the same strategy until he is defeated. From here we grab our heart container and our well-deserved Georg's remains. And this concludes our little video about the Great Bay Temple. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you know what to do.